a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing, your friendly neighborhood merchants now in a liquor store near you. I'm John Bonus of Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic.
We are on the verge of the World Series starting.
We are on the verge.
The Twins are still not involved. I was hoping maybe that would change.
No.
In the last several weeks.
No,
Didn't change.
Still haven't turned it around.
No. These bums haven't done a thing to turn it around. Yankees-Dodgers as a World Series. I'm of two minds on this. First, I do like that the number one seeds, the best regular season teams. Now, you can argue about that, obviously. You could have said the Phillies were the best in the NL or the, whatever. It's close. It's only a couple games, over 162. Right. But I do like the idea that
two really good teams.
Two very good teams, two not consensus top teams, but no surprise that either of these teams made the World Series. Obviously, I do like, I don't think every year I would want that, but I do like that the chaos of the baseball playoffs can occasionally just lead to chalk, can occasionally just lead to NBA type matchups or even NFL type matchups where it's like, oh yeah, these are the two teams a lot of people were expecting. On the other hand, it's not that fun.
These are not the two teams.
Right. I mean, it's not that fun when they're the two most expensive teams or the most expensive team in each league, basically. I know the Mets were right up there with the Dodgers too, maybe slightly ahead, but you guys get the idea. And that, of course, plays into everyone's fears of, especially Twins fans or teams like the Twins.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
or 23 other teams.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, probably 15 other teams, I would say, something like that. Where it's like, what does it really matter? It becomes almost like, Premier League football or something like that, where the 5 teams at the top win and the other teams are happy to finish 11th or whatever. It's like, we really did a lot this year. We avoided relegation. It's not quite that bad. But then, of course, whenever people bring that up, though, I point to like last year, for instance. When it was not that the Rangers didn't spend a bunch of money, but no one was expecting Rangers Diamondbacks at any point in the season, like even going into the playoffs.
Right. Certainly not during going into the playoffs.
Right. And so on one hand, this confirms a lot of fears where you can just spend your way to winning. The one advantage baseball has, or the one way baseball has been able to avoid that, because really, if you look at regular season results, money does equal winning. Over 5, 10, 20, 30 years.
Correct.
The teams that spend the most win the most. It allows them. It doesn't mean that a expensive team can flop for a year or 2 or 3, and it doesn't mean that the Rays or whatever, outlier team, Twins, whatever, can surge ahead for multiple years. But over the course of decades, there's a, direct correlation between consistency of winning and spending. But the one kind of...
That was actually the story that turned twinsgeek.com from a little-known blog that was read by 10 people to one that was read by 60-plus people.
Holy
crap. To 600-plus people.
Oh, wow.
Was I did a correlation test.
Yeah.
And basically I said, okay, but...
That's why it's called the Geek.
And the correlation was something like 0.55 or something like that. And I'm like, so is that high or is that not high? And I said, well, here's another correlation. Most people, if they're trying to figure out how their team is going to do next year, take a look at what they did the year before.
Right. Previous year's record.
Right. The previous year's record, right? Like if, those are the good teams and that's who you expect. And it turns out it's a higher correlation than that.
Right. Money matters more than the previous year's record. And I would guess, I don't know this
now, that was
true.
That was by the way 20 years
but
ago.
I'm guessing it's only become more stratified. Is that the word? Where the top is the top and the bottom is way below. And people always point to, well, okay, so but on the regular season front, that is always true. That's why the Yankees have made the playoffs 18 of the last 20 years, and the Dodgers win every. But the one saving grace, the one way baseball is able to avoid that becoming the story of the sport, is that the playoffs are insane. Well, the playoffs are just a series of coin flips.
The nature of baseball is, in fact, a pretty random game,
right? Especially when you're playing 3-game series, 5-game series, that sort of thing, and so.
You can see that by the regular season records, by the way. Like the fact that a really good team wins 60% of its games shows you.
And a terrible team, other than the White Sox, win 35, 40% of their games. Much different than other sports. And so a pretty good team can beat a great team 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5 or even 4 out of 7 all the time. And that kind of saves baseball from the monetary aspect taking over and being the defining characteristic of the entire sport. But it is and I like that, obviously, as someone involved with the Twins here. That's good for the Twins. If it was just based on money, the Twins would never have any shot. Now, you might argue that the Twins don't have any shot as is. But it is nice or interesting or sort of fitting, I guess, at least once every few years or once every decade to just have, one seed versus one seed. Let's do it. Let's have the two biggest powers. It's like, Lakers, Celtics, or I don't even know football. I would say Cowboys, Patriots. In terms of popularity, but the Cowboys don't win anything ever. Since I was a kid, basically in the 90s. But yeah, I don't know. Not the two teams I would have chosen, but interesting nonetheless. And obviously the star power with Judge on one side and
the
Ohtani.
history between both franchises and
That's
such.
The other thing is
Dodgers Yankees used to be a thing.
Yeah, but not since the 80s.
No, it hasn't. No, I mean, and I was actually referring back to the 50s when they weren't even the LA Dodgers. Right?
Yeah, they were the same. Brooklyn and New York, obviously, they were. And that's the one thing about baseball that's so funny to me is, yes, it's true that money equals wins, and yes, it's true that I think I saw a stat that of the last 25 or 30 World Series winners, all but 4 have been in the top 10 in payroll for that season or the top 12 in payroll.
Okay.
And there's a big difference between being number 1 in payroll and being number 11 in payroll. It's usually $100 million or something. But it does show that it's very difficult, even for the Rays, let's say, who are the best at it, to overcome that. You can overcome it, but the degree of difficulty is much higher. And yet, the Yankees haven't played the Dodgers in 40 years in the World Series.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a good mix to me. I mean, there are a lot of flaws with baseball. It is not without issue.
I would suggest that statistic you just said, also points out.
Might be pure BS, by the way. I just saw that somewhere.
Right. Also point out that correlation is not necessarily causation on this. Like, one of the reasons that might be the case is that teams that are really good have to retain their players. They have to pay them through arbitration. They have to continue to pay free agency. They become more expensive, right? And that is to bring that back to the Twins, exactly what we didn't see this time. Just as you kind of hit your competitive window is when you need to spend money to be in those top 10 to maintain that level of quality that you've got on that team. And when they got to that point, they couldn't do it, which I would argue is, one of the big limitations of financial the financial limits of small market teams is that they get to that window and they can't make that additional investment, and so as a result of that, their window closes a lot faster.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of them. Can't, won't, unwilling, whatever, same thing.
Right.
I agree with that. You get to a spot where a team like the Red Sox or the Phillies or something would go, we got something pretty good here. Let's add $50 million in payroll.
That's right.
Add a starter and a big bat, and let's go here for the next 3 years.
That's right.
That doesn't really happen for whatever reason. I also think there's a consistency element that I was kind of talking about, which is the Yankees are not perfect, and the Yankees haven't won a World Series in 20 years or whatever. But the Yankees pretty much win 90 games every year because they can take a full crack at the season every season. Do you know what I mean?
That's right.
They're never coming into it half-baked. They're never coming into it in a rebuilding year. Now, they rebuild. They have good farm systems. Some years they spend more. Some years they have higher expectations, all that stuff. But they're taking a full swing at every season, whereas, the Pittsburgh Pirates or even the Guardians or the Twins or, the Tigers and the Royals and teams like that, they're entering some seasons where it's like, we're hoping to be okay. We're not spending much money.
Right.
Who knows what could happen? That is a huge advantage in terms of being a consistent force or a consistent playoff contender. And then the other part is that you kind of talked about, I guess, with making big moves and stuff, but I view it as you're much more able. Like, I think everyone focuses small market versus big market or mid market versus big market on, well, they can't go out and sign Juan Soto. They can't go inside Aaron Judge. They can't give the maximum extensions. They can't go out and sign Shohei Ohtani. Yeah, the Twins were never going to give Shohei Ohtani $700 million. There's only 4 or 5 teams that could even fathom that, basically. Well, that's a huge advantage. You can just bring in stars from elsewhere and just go, he's ours now.
Right.
That's massive. But an equally sometimes big advantage is that you can go out and sign, I'm trying to think of like Albert Pujols, if you're the Angels. Not Angels, maybe not the best example. Carlos Rodon.
Right.
The Yankees gave him $160 million. And his first year, he was terrible, and he was injured. And this year's been much better. But even if he hadn't been much better, they can absorb a massive mistake like that. Whereas if the Twins were to do that,
right.
That's their one big signing. I mean, we're seeing that kind of with Correa
That's
at this
right.
point. Not that he's been a huge mistake, but if the one big signing doesn't work out really well,
you can't paper over it.
Right. You can't just shove that inside and go next.
Right.
We'll move on to the next. And so those are these are not things people don't know. But when you watch it, for some reason, to me, and maybe it's just the Twins' personal history with the Yankees.
Right.
And maybe it's just me being someone who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s when the Yankees were their peak
Dominance,
Yankeeing.
right. Yeah, that's right.
And the Dodgers were kind of, they spent a lot of money, but they weren't amazing at any point. My strong preference that I didn't even realize until a few days ago was for the Dodgers to win. Mm-hmm. And I will root for any team over the Yankees. But what I mean is I didn't expect to be like, go Dodgers. And I'm like, why? Even against the Mets, I was like, well, first of all, I love Shohei Ohtani.
It might have surprised you in part because I don't think you were necessarily go Guardians.
No, I was not.
Versus the Yankees.
I was like, yeah, go ahead and hit a 3-run homer, beat the Yankees. Go on, we're happy for you.
That's right.
Whatever. That was.
I was go Guardians.
Yeah, somebody said to me
that was a hell of a series. There was, or at least there were a lot of fun late endings to those games.
Yes, that was a crazy series. I mean, I would say this whole postseason. Now, the NLCS wasn't amazing. There were some blowouts and stuff.
I was gonna say.
But the first 2 rounds were amazing.
At least they had some amazing ones.
Yes,
that's right.
The ALCS I thought was incredible. Not so much if you're a Guardians fan, but that's part of the draw for me, I guess.
Right.
And I don't know. I would expect the World Series to be pretty good. So that's our little playoff talk. The one thing I wanted to say about watching the playoffs is, and seeing whenever a game is national, it's the only game going.
Right.
And Twitter just talks about that game. It's like being in a chat room almost, like if you follow enough baseball people.
Right.
And people are just commenting on every play and everything that the announcer says and all that. It's fun. So many complaints or arguments about the exact kind of when Twins fans have Twins blinders on, which we talk about a fair amount, they consider to be like Rocco-isms.
Okay,
which is short starts, bullpen games, platooning hitters in the lineup, mid-game moves where you're pulling a good hitter for a lesser hitter because there's a lefty on the mound, that sort of thing. And I was like, all these things that we're seeing at extreme levels in the playoff. I mean, the Tigers put a spin on it that was like, oh, it's chaos pitching. Mm-hmm. Well, really, it's just bullpen games and short starts.
Right,
that's a good way to spin it. So your fan base isn't furious with you about it. Nobody's going 5 innings anymore, even good starters at this point. Not nobody, but you know what I mean. Plenty of platooning. Teams are benching good lefties against lefties and bringing them in. All the stuff, and I'm sure there's other examples too, all the stuff that Twins fans get furious with Baldelli about, in part because they just disagree with it. And there's room for that. I'm not saying these are flawless decisions or anything.
I would also say in part also because they just want to second guess when things.
Well,
when you only win 40 or 60%.
But one of the things we talk about is almost nothing the Twins are doing, good or bad, are unique to them.
Right. That's right.
And when it's, the Twins are always injured. Well, they were middle of the pack this year in injuries. When a couple years ago, the Twins have, they yanked their starters so early. Well, last year they had the 3rd most innings in baseball for their starters. Even this year, when their starters were not good, they were middle of the pack in that. Platooning. Bunting, not bunting, all this stuff.
Bullpen breaking down.
That too.
Right?
Yeah, ask Cleveland about that.
I know.
It's a lovely thing to ride when it's working.
And the Yankees, for that matter, both of those bullpens ended up.
And so this is not a defense of Rocco Baldelli's decision making at all. I'm not saying you can't criticize him. I'm not saying he's not worthy of criticism. We've criticized him plenty on some of this stuff. All I'm saying is it's not unique.
Right.
It's not. And actually, in the season-ending thing with Falvey on the last day of the season, he was asked about platooning and the lineup, and will you guys go away from that kind of approach, the matchup-based approach, and get more of a set lineup and all that? And he kind of.
Boy, I missed that question. Okay.
You weren't in the room.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying the thing at the
gotcha,
the last day of the season.
Got it. Last day of the season.
You were in 3 days later, or whatever it was.
That's right.
This was just handsome, charming people.
I know those people.
I mean, I don't know. There's about 3 of them. Doe and Betsy and Bobby. That's all we got.
That's right.
Handsome and charming.
That's right.
Phil, I'm not putting in there.
No.
I'm sick of watching Phil's hair flowing in the breeze. Anyway, we just had, by the way, we should note, on the Patreon side for our handsome and charming and good-smelling Patreon subscribers.
That is correct.
We just had Phil Miller on for like an hour and a half. We went back old school, and we recorded it live at a brewery.
Right. So if you're somebody who goes back years with Gleeman and the Geek, back
you remember
to 2017,
the bar hopping
2016.
episodes.
That's right. We've got one out there. It's on the Patreon.
Yes.
You can sign
It's a
up
good
for
one.
it. And in fact, we're actually going to play a little clip of it.
Yeah, we'll wait till the end. We'll play a little clip of Phil giving us some insight into the Polad situation.
Because he was the one with the story. He broke the story. So we wanted to find out what he knew that he didn't reveal in the story.
So we liquored him up a little bit.
That's
and
right. We got
But what I was going to say was, what was I going to say? That's a great question, Aaron. Boy, I'm a moron.
You're talking about how stuff was not unique to Rocco, and then on the last day he was asked about the lineup.
He gets asked about, the
Continue to platoon, etc.
Why don't you guys have a set lineup, and why do you play matchups with in-game moves, and why do you bench lefties against left-handed pitchers? And will that change because of the flop of the lineup down the stretch? And what Falvey basically said, I should find the quote, but I won't. But what he basically said was, we're definitely going to look into that. I mean, it's clear that there's something with this lineup that we need to look into. Now, it turned out they fired the hitting coach like 3 days later. We're going to talk about that in a second. But what he also said was, you have to be careful not to pull back too much or to go swing to the opposite end of the spectrum. And he said, if we're being honest with ourselves, the successful teams this season, and he even said the teams we're going to see in the playoffs, which goes to what we have seen now 3 weeks later in the playoffs.
Or rather, the teams we're going to watch in the playoffs.
Well, yeah. True. Do these same things. Now, do they do them the exact same way or as often or as well? That's the real key, as well.
Sure.
None of these things are bad if you do them well. The question is always, should you continue doing them if you're not doing them well? Or do you have the personnel to do them well? All sorts of things. But it has been interesting to watch the playoffs and be like, short starts, bullpen games, pinch hitting, platooning, not bunting, all this stuff that drive Twins fans nuts.
It's sort of interesting that, we've always seen that tendency, those sort of things in the playoffs. Could be short series, etc. Each game means more
days off, so you can rely on your bullpen more.
And I hadn't really thought about this, but it is interesting to me that during the regular season, 162 games, we're seeing more of those strategies in use, even though it's a 162 game season.
Yeah.
As if the games mean more than they used to mean.
Well, I think maybe what happened. It's funny because, like you said,
especially because a lot of them are sabermetrically driven, which is based on a large data set, which is more long-term thinking in a lot of ways.
It used to be like teams would really lean heavily on their starters. I'm talking even 10 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago. And they'd get to the playoffs, and guys would get pulled after 5 innings, and people would go nuts. Like, what? This guy's the Cy Young winner, whatever. And then we started seeing starting pitchers get used as relievers, like on their off days. Like Scherzer, I remember, did that. Strasburg did that. And then we just started seeing relievers, like parades of relievers. I remember the Royals famously made a World Series run, 2 of them actually, based on a dominant bullpen, short starts, go to the relievers early. And I think what happened was that was kind of when push comes to shove, which is the playoffs, when it really matters, when every win matters, that is the strategy that teams actually believe is the best strategy, the most effective strategy to win games, is to not let your starter go a third time through the lineup, to lean heavily on your bullpen, to platoon hitters, to play matchups, to swing for home runs, not small ball, all that stuff. That is kind of, if you give them a truth serum of the playoffs, that is what comes out of their mouths. That is that we do this when we want to win. And I think what happened is once that became kind of acceptable or conventional wisdom that this is how you win in the playoffs, then I think a lot of teams just went, well, if that's actually what we think is the best strategy to win, why don't we just do it in the regular season too?
Could be.
Now, the problem, like you said, is there are not as many off days. It's a 6-month grind instead of a 6-week grind or whatever it is.
26 men on the roster.
Yes, but I do think that the expansion of the roster from 25 to 26 was not insignificant. And the fact that now every team has 13 pitchers makes it a lot. You have 8 relievers basically at all times. Makes you a lot more able to blow out the bullpen time after time, although there is some evidence that the teams that ride their bullpens the hardest either watch them break down at the end of the regular season with painful results, Or
in the postseason,
with
even more painful
these
results.
guys are just running on fumes. Now, it's also possible Class A and those guys just had a bad few games. But, yeah, it's interesting. That's part of what makes baseball great is that there's legitimate debate about stuff. There is not legitimate debate about the NBA playoffs. It's give your guy the best guy the ball and go.
Sure, right.
And I do like that there's legitimate debate about what actually works. Like, what is the most effective strategy to do that. Before we talk some actual Twins-related stuff, let's talk first about our presenting sponsor, which is Blackstack Brewing.
Blackstack Brewing. I finally got around to trying their Slopes French Pilsner.
Thank God, John. I was worried you were going without beer too long.
I got to tell you, listen, I'm an IPA snob. I'm a hazy IPA snob, so that's one of the reasons why I like Blackstack. And in fact, that's why I get good feedback about liking Blackstack from all kinds of people. Who are like,
all the other snobs, but also the working man likes Blackstack too.
But that Slopes French Pilsner is really good, and I've been looking for a good Pilsner, and that's one of them. You can find it now just about every place because they got a new distributor, and so they're all over the state of Minnesota, from Grand Marais to Rochester, Winona to Fargo. You can go to their tap room as well, which is over there on
94 and 280?
Yeah, 94 and 218. There's 280. What is it? Yeah,
280.
280, that's right. Which is the second biggest tap room in Minnesota. But now you can
just go to your local liquor store.
Right.
And if they don't carry it, which a lot of them now do, and you
Right.
can go to the Blackstack website and look at the list of places now carrying it. But if you say, hey, you guys should get Blackstack, they can actually make that happen now
That is
through their
correct.
distributor.
That's right.
So Blackstack Brewing, go 94 and 280 to check it out, or just check out your local liquor store. And be like John and be a beer snob and drink good beer.
That's right.
Why not?
We've got a new sponsor, and it's Acorns. And here's what I like about Acorns. I'm running across some people based on something I'm going through of people who are afraid to invest money in anything other than like a checking account.
Yeah, you're looking at one right now.
Yeah, I did think of this when this sponsor came on board.
I got a good story about that for later. Go ahead.
That's right. And I'm just kind of like, why aren't you investing your money? And then I thought, well, because it can be a little spooky, right? And you don't want to make a big mistake. Well, the beautiful thing about Acorns app is that you can do the smallest of amounts in investing. It's just an easy way for you to get into investing and to invest as small of amount as you
spare change.
That is exactly right.
You can get kind of bonus investments.
That's right.
Through the app.
Yeah, they make it really easy to automatically saving and investing for your future. You don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. You can just get started with just your spare change, like you just said. And they recommend an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals, and then it automatically invests that money for you.
So here's what you do. Go to acorns.com/Gleeman or download the Acorns app, ACORNS, Acorns, to start saving and investing for your future. Today, this is a paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/Gleeman.
That's right. All right. Acorns app.
That's our first SEC regulated ad.
That's right.
When I see SEC, I just think like Alabama, Georgia. That's my brain. That's why I'm not the world's best investor.
That's right.
Yeah, I went.
That's why you need Acorns.
It is. I'm gonna try it. Yeah, I went to. I had to change. I started a new bank account for a dumb reason a while back. Not recently, but very helpful person at the bank, and she was like, "Where's like your investment stuff?" And I was like, that checking account you're looking at? And she's like, not that I got millions in there or something, but, I got a few $1,000 in there.
Right.
And she was like, this doesn't earn any interest. And I was like, oh, I get like 30 cents a month. And she's like, yeah, that's bad, right? And I'm like, I don't know. But as you were saying on the ad that we just read,
right.
No one ever told me about investing. First of all, I never had any money to invest until about a week ago. And then she was like, we can just put you in a real basic, some kind of fund or some kind of CD or some, and I'm like, okay, let's do half. And a month later, they're like, you made $100 in, interest or whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm Bill Gates now. Like, I'm like, this is the investing world.
Yeah, that's right.
Meanwhile, I was telling someone else who actually knows about this stuff and has a lot of money, that story. And they're like, that's stupid too. I could put you in like a whatever and you can make like, $1,000 a month. And I'm like, nah, let's stick to this. Anyway, acorns.com/Gleeman. Was that anyway, that wasn't an ad. That was just me telling you a dumb story about myself. Sorry. Okay. So the biggest news, I guess, because when last we spoke on the free show, we were focused on the two things. One, the poll ad situation, which we talked a lot about, obviously, and then the new television setup. So we talked about that with Phil a little bit too, actually on the Patreon side too. Since then, the biggest bit of news, or the only bit of news, because any player-related, contract options, 40-man roster stuff, there's not going to be any trades or free agent signings, obviously, until after the World Series. Like 5 days after the World Series, when stuff really starts to roll, which we probably got a couple weeks for that. But the Twins made a change at hitting coach, which they announced that at the end of the season, obviously.
Well, yeah, they announced that they'd gotten rid of 3 of their hitting coaches. Right?
And plus Tony Diaz, the infield coach. They got rid of or parted ways with David Popkins, Derek Showman, and Rudy Hernandez, the entire hitting department of the coaching staff. And then a funny thing happened, which was last week everyone reported that, and we even talked about it on the show, on the Patreon show, where we react to like news as it happens. Matt Borgschulte, who was their AAA hitting coach for 3 years.
The Twins AAA.
Yes, the Twins.
Or the Saints.
At AAA St. Paul,
right.
The Saints, from 2019 through 2021.
Okay.
And before that, he was their Fort Myers, which is single-A hitting coach for a year or two. And then before that, he was in the college ranks, which they like to find guys in the college ranks. And he was pretty successful. I mean, if you look at that 2019 to 2021, and obviously 2020 was a lost minor league season, right. So he played a big part in working behind the scenes with guys like Jose Miranda, who then had a breakout the next year with the Twins, guys like Ryan Jeffers, Royce Lewis, Trevor Larnach. A lot of the kind of core guys now came up and worked with him and say pretty nice things about him or positive things about him. So you're probably saying to yourself, well, why didn't they hire him in 2022? Well, in 2022, he was their AAA hitting coach, and they fired their Major League hitting coach, and they brought in David Popkins, who was the single-A hitting coach in the Dodgers organization, and was only 3 years past retiring as a player himself, I think, or 4 years past that point. And they gave him the job, kind of over Borgschulte. And right. I do remember at the time talking to a few people who were not saying anything negative about Popkins, who was viewed as kind of a rising star. Right. He was like 30 years old at that point, which Borgschulte is only 32 now. So they were both kind of in the same boat. Right. But people were just surprised. Like, they had a good hitting coach at AAA who'd done it for 3 years, and the young guys liked him, and he was well regarded. Why is he not? And then what ended up happening, I think they were hoping he would just stay at AAA and they could have both.
And instead,
the Baltimore Orioles swooped in and made him their co-hitting coach in the majors, and he was there for the last 3 seasons. Over the past 2 seasons, this year and 2023, they led the American League in runs scored over that 2-year period, and they had a lot of young hitters. I mean, you guys, we've talked about it, that Orioles have drafted and developed through their rebuild tons of young position players. And I think they were second in runs scored this year and like third the year before, and combined over the 2 years, they're the number 1 team in the American League. And now he's back. And it sounds like what's interesting is the Orioles also, I think, had 2 or 3 hitting coaches, like co-hitting coaches. That's kind of become sort of the norm. Okay. They fired 1 or 2 of them, but not Borgschulte. Huh. They were planning to keep Borgschulte. And then like a week later, my guess is the Twins did 2 things. 1, they gave him the full hitting coach title, right. So he'll lead the hitting group is my assumption, where he was the co-hitting coach in Baltimore. And then 2, a raise.
Probably a raise. Right.
And you add in, the comfort with the organization, and he knows a lot of these guys and all that stuff. But it's not like he's a Minnesotan or anything like that. And so now he's back. They kind of get a mulligan on the decision that I think a lot of people think they probably should have just made more straightforward, 3 years ago. But here's another interesting aspect. between the time it was reported last week that Borgschulte was going to be the new hitting coach and the time 2 days ago that the Twins actually announced it and did a little press conference and he talked about it and all that, David Popkins got hired as the Toronto Blue Jays hitting coach.
Oh, really?
Which is
interesting.
Good for him.
Yeah,
but it's just funny to get fired and rehired by a different team
Right.
before they name your replacement, basically. Right. And so you got plenty of good bats in Toronto to work with. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, guys like that.
And as we go, we're going to be going over our over-unders later on.
Yes.
And considering they were one of the most disappointing teams in the American
That's
League, they could probably use a new hitting coach. Yeah.
Yes. So he's the new hitting coach in Toronto. Matt Borgschulte is the new hitting coach with the Twins. It sounds like they're going to add 2 more hitting coaches kind of under him.
Sure.
I don't know what the titles will be, but he's going to be the lead guy there. I mean, Popkins technically was just one of the hitting coaches, but he was the lead guy for the Twins just in terms of responsibility and stuff. So it's interesting. I'm not going to sit here, and I know John won't either, and pretend that we can meaningfully quantify the effect of individual hitting coaches. Right. We can't. We can tell you that people.
I'm not even sure people within the organization or people who supervise can meaningfully quantify that.
No.
But they can evaluate, and they have to evaluate. I mean, they have to evaluate. That's part of their job.
The hitting coach is probably the most fired and hired job in Major League Baseball.
Sure.
And pitching coach is probably second.
Right.
Because when something goes wrong, they're the scapegoat. When something goes right, they're not necessarily credited as much as the players or the manager or whatever. And to your point, nobody really knows what makes a good hitting or pitching coach. Right. I don't mean to say it's random, but sometimes really well-respected players who go into coaching and rise up the ranks and get the job are terrible.
Sure.
And sometimes random guys who are just career nothing, didn't even play in the minors, came from college, people were skeptical when they were hired, they're brilliant at the job. Right. And sometimes guys who are brilliant at the job 2 years later are terrible and vice versa. It's just really – so I'm not going to sit here and say we can say Matt Borgschulte will be a good hitting coach. I'm sure if you go back and listen to what we said about David Popkins, we didn't claim to know one way or the other. Right. But I do think from a background standpoint, it's a interesting hire. Like it's a – I don't know, exciting is the right word, but like I think Twins fans should be encouraged by it. He's a guy who has truly risen up the ranks, had success at 2 levels with the Twins where people said good things about him, including players now, and then went to one of the more now successful major league teams to coach a lineup filled with rookies and sophomores and juniors, and they had great outcomes with those guys universally. And the fact that the Orioles kind of cleaned house a little bit on the hitting side, but wanted to keep him around seems like a fairly good thing in general. Now, the question is, what's the different approach that he's bringing from David Popkins? And as we talked about on the Patreon side with Phil, it's going to have to be small stuff because the big picture approach of hit the ball in the air, pull it hard, that's what every team's going for. 25 out of the 30 teams are going for. Is there room to improve at game planning? Yes, that seemed to be a big thing.
Or game situations.
Yes,
right?
adjustments in game.
Adjusting to a pitcher who's doing something different than you expect.
Not just sticking to what you thought was going to happen all game, which seemed to be a point of criticism towards the previous coaching staff. And then, of course, there's small tweaks you can do, taking the ball the other way sometimes or changing your approach in certain situations with guys on base or key spots or late innings or something. But, the cliched – they're just all or nothing swinging for the fences team. Well, the Twins were not among the league leaders in homers or strikeouts this year, especially strikeouts. I mean, they struck out less than an average team. So that isn't really even that valid of a complaint, but there's certainly room for improvement. I really think the biggest thing that they are hoping to improve isn't so much approach or individual hitters or anything. They're trying to improve the thing that wrecked them this season and has wrecked them for month-long stints in the past under Popkins, which is when things start to go poorly, why does it nosedive and crash completely? Right. Why can we not pull out of this thing before 2 months are over? Why does it have to last every April? Why do they collapse not just for 2 weeks, but for 7 weeks?
Yeah, and not even just at a team level, but just at individual level. Right. Like when things go poorly for Julian or Kirilloff or whoever, right? Why do we have to send them down to AAA for them to be able to get themselves out of it?
Yeah. And then obviously, you zoom in a little, we got to get confident that somebody's going to fix Royce Lewis. Right. We got to get confident that somebody's going to get the most out of Miranda and Julian and guys like that.
Wallner. I mean, and you've got a lot of various different approaches here.
That's the thing. There's a ton of young, because, Brooks Lee, by this time next year, we'll be talking about Emmanuel Rodriguez having joined the bunch. Right. Luke Keishel maybe will be. Like, this lineup is already pretty young in terms of the core.
Walker Jenkins.
Yeah, well, that's true. Honestly, by this time next year, he might have made a debut too. So the fact that Borgschulte has a track record of having success and being well regarded by young hitters specifically, both in the minors but then in the majors with the Orioles, seems like on paper, theoretically, a good fit because that's what he's going to be dealing with the Twins. It's not to say you won't have the random, Carlos Santana, and obviously Correa and Buxton are not young guys at this point. Correa's got a pretty good idea of what he's trying to do. Correa actually was a huge Popkins fan. Right. I think if it would have been sort of a coin flip decision, I think Correa might have had some sway to keep Popkins around, but I think it got untenable to the point that they were like, we have to make a change. So it's Matt Borgschulte. That'll be, I don't know, it'll certainly be a storyline. And while that is not the sacrificial lamb that a lot of fans might be wanted the way the season ended, they wanted bigger targets. They wanted,
bigger game
managers and front office guys and all that. But hitting coach is pretty high up there. I do think that's kind of, if you had to just put, there were no shortage of things that went poorly this year. On the field, off the field, injuries, moves and lack of moves, all that stuff. But if I said to you, you can only choose one thing, well, it has to be the collapse of the hitting for the last 7 weeks of the season. Right. I mean, that just torpedoed the whole season. And so if you're going to fix only one thing, that seems like the place to start. And honestly, they're selling the team. So that's pretty big prey in itself there.
Yeah, the two things you'd probably fix were the hitting and ownership.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being honest, and we talked about this.
And not in that order.
A month ago, we've talked about this for 10 years, but I never imagined that the ownership change being a realistic possibility. And I probably poo-pooed that at various points over the years. I'm sure I read dozens of mailbag questions over the years that were like, how can we get the Pohleds to sell? And I was like, you can't. There's no way you can.
I bet you skipped a bunch of mailbag questions where that was the question. Because
no, I just draw them at random. You're probably right.
We're not going to answer this again.
But I know I said, unfortunately, there's no way to sort of compel them to do that monetarily. Now, it turns out.
Maybe there is.
Well, I don't think this was, look, obviously.
Not by the fans, but.
Well, right. Ultimately, it's money when you're talking about a thing that's worth $1.5 billion. Right. But I do think that the sullying of the name Pohlad and just the outsized negative reaction that they've gotten for 30 years, but really over the last several months as this season fell apart and the payroll cuts and the TV situation and some of the tone-deaf quotes that Joe Pohlad gave and all that stuff, it really reached a heightened level that I'm not going to say they haven't seen it before because, Carl Pohlad.
They have definitely seen it before,
but
right?
It reached levels
this generation might not have seen it before.
Exactly. That this third generation, the grandkids and the kids, hadn't experienced. And from talking to Phil and our own experiences with this, I really just think they were sick of it. I really just think that generation said, what are the pros and cons now of owning this team? And if the pros are not making money hand over fist year over year, and the cons are people are, shouting expletives at us on the street or whatever. Or we go somewhere and we say, hi, I'm Pohlad. And they go, oh, boy, Pohlad. Yeah, sell it. And so you can't get any bigger of a change.
I don't think that made any difference whatsoever, their decision to sell, but I could be wrong. I think it came down to they need some liquid cash, and this is how they get it. But, they don't have a lot of other options.
That's the only way this entire process starts. Don't get me wrong. If they're making money at this thing, and their other business ventures, commercial real estate specifically, are thriving,
Right.
then they can just
I think if they could have found other things to raise liquid money in their portfolio, they would have. I think they've already exhausted a lot of
but
their
you're not going
things.
to be able to raise $2 billion in liquid without gutting your entire business structure. Whereas you can sell this one luxury item. It's like a person who's got a mansion full of great furniture and paintings and cars and everything, and then they lose their job and they fall on hard times, and they say to themselves, I can either move into an apartment and sell this place and everything in it, or I got that one painting that's worth $5 million. I can just sell that.
Right.
It's like, just sell that
Right.
and go on with the rest of your life. This is their painting, basically. Before we talk a little bit about some of the season-ending awards and my general disagreement with several of them, and the fact that no one cares, rightfully, let's read our last sponsor here, which is BetterHelp. And the way BetterHelp works is if you wake up one day and you got something going on with your life and you think, I'd like to talk to someone about this, or I'd like to get some help with this, or I'd like to address this, today's the day.
Right.
The worst thing that can happen is some barrier for entry, something that is a speed bump towards that, whether it's having to make a phone call, having to schedule something weeks in advance, having to go through insurance when it's difficult.
It can become an excuse beyond the excuses.
Yes.
Whatever excuses you were making to not talk to somebody, now you've got
Stops
further
your
excuses.
momentum.
That's right.
BetterHelp can get you with a real licensed therapist, typically within 2 or 3 days.
Right. You just fill out a questionnaire.
Yes. They can tailor it towards what you're comfortable with. So if you want to do a video chat, you can do that. If you don't want to be on video, you do a phone call. If you hate making phone calls like I do, you can just do a text chat with them. And
You can give them your schedule. They'll work around your schedule, right?
Yes.
And all you do is you fill out a brief questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can also switch therapists anytime.
If you don't
for
like them,
no additional charge.
try someone
Right.
else
Yeah, that's
or
right.
not. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/Gleeman today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP. BetterHelp.com/Gleeman. Okay. So at the end of every year, or every offseason, they have the Diamond Awards, which John is you're on the committee,
I
right?
think I'm on the committee this year.
Okay. It's a real well-run, well-oiled machine, is what you're saying?
I just haven't been. I haven't been as active on it recently. But
Yeah,
yes.
because they don't take calls from Brazil.
Well, that's part of it. Yeah.
And if people have gone, it's part sort of.
Twins Daily will have a table there. So by the way, if you go and sign up before the end of November for this event, which is a great event,
it's part award show, part charity drive.
That's right.
And it's a dinner.
Meet and greet players and
Yes.
talk baseball. It's the weekend of Twins Fest. It's the Thursday night before Twins Fest.
Correct.
It's at the Armory in downtown Minneapolis, which is a gorgeous venue to be able to have this thing. Have some drinks and talk
can see
baseball
John
with
in
people.
a suit.
That's right. Twins Daily does have a table if you go and sign up. And by the way, I think tickets are $250, but they're $200 before the end of November.
Yes. And it goes to.
So go to ticket, and if you put down Twins Daily is what the organization you're for, you'll get to sit with
What's
Twins
the
Daily
name?
writers.
It's related to Bob Allison, the organization.
It's the
ALS?
Yeah, it's the University of Minnesota Foundation. I mean, it's all kinds of different. I think it's neurological.
But the
disease
reason
or
they're
something,
linked to
right?
that is because one of their great players in the 60s, Bob Allison,
Correct.
who was a top dozen player in Twins history,
Right.
late in his career sort of had issues and then turned out post-career died early and had
it does all kinds of research and really cool research, by the way, like in terms of sort of diagnosing people who are probably prime candidates to eventually get it.
Early detection.
Early detection, and then here's what you can kind of do to start battling it now and delay it. So
anyway, part of that is the end of season team awards are
Right.
given out, the official team awards. And the BBWA members vote on that, most of them. There's a couple that the Twins just give to
how
somebody.
many are we talking? Like for instance, let me specifically for the MVP. Do you have any idea how many votes
Yes.
are tallied?
More than 10 and fewer than 20.
Okay.
So like 15, 18, something like that.
All right.
And so we vote for like,
And that's interesting to me because there's maybe 6 beat writers as part of that.
yeah. And then it's columnists,
Right.
former columnists who are sort of, what's it called? You're emeritus? Is that what it's
That's
called?
we'll call it emeritus.
Yeah. It's an interesting group because some of the awards, MVP pitcher of the year, rookie of the year, defensive player of the year, all that stuff, comeback player or most improved, all that. You can do that on your couch. I mean, nobody knows that more than me. I could do it on my couch. They didn't let me vote until I started coming, but you know what I mean. But there's also like media good guy, which is like who's the player who's most sort of helpful, giving quotes and talking and all that. Well, you can't give that unless you're trying to do the interviews, right? And yet people who haven't been to the park in years still vote on that. There's also like leadership awards, like who was the Twins' best leader. Now, I don't claim that being in the clubhouse for an hour a day makes you an expert on who is or isn't a Twins leader, but you got some insight into it that I think if I didn't
There's
go
also
to
community.
Well, the Twins name that one. We don't do that. I think Royce Lewis won that one.
Yeah,
maybe?
that's right. That is correct. He did.
Yeah, they don't let us vote on that because what do we know?
Well, I was wondering. Yeah,
none of us give to charity, so why are we voting? No,
you are the charity.
Yeah, the Gleeman Fund, money for spinal deformities and just overall stupidity. But so anyway, there's a bunch of awards that they give out, and I wanted to go through some of them. They've been announced, so we're not breaking anything. We can just start at the top, I guess, which is Team MVP. And a funny thing happened this year with Team MVP, which is that their best players, like in terms of performance above average or above the league norm or sort of star caliber performances, they didn't have a ton of them in general, but they had a few. Correa was an all-star shortstop. Right. Byron Buxton had the second highest OPS among all center fielders behind Aaron Judge. You had some starting pitchers and some relievers who were fantastic too, but those two guys were the only players on the team where their performance stood out at an all-star or better level. Right. And they played 86 games for Correa and 102 games for Buxton. Right. And you even had guys like Matt Wallner, who also stood out at that level and played 70 games or whatever it was. Didn't even play a half a season. And so it becomes kind of difficult when you're naming an MVP.
When they're missing arguably the most important stretches of the season as well.
Right, exactly. Right. And then you also have guys like Royce Lewis who were phenomenal and then horrendous at the most important time of the season. And so you're looking at the end result, and there are two ways that I think people went with this. I chose to go with I voted for Carlos Correa as MVP, and I wrote about it. And here's the first thing I wrote last week when I wrote this. Trust me, I'd prefer my team MVP not be someone who played 86 games. Right. Yeah, I get it. I get if you just sort of reject that premise, but he led the team in pretty much any statistic, cumulative, by the way. So you don't get credit for production you're not doing. Right. WAR, wins above replacement, win probability added, all those sorts of things, because he was phenomenal for 55% of the season.
Right. All while playing a premium defensive position, at a very high level.
And the same thing with Buxton. He played 102 games. He was one of the top 3 on a per game basis center fielders in baseball. Yes, you'd like him to play more, but the difficulty comes in if you are someone, and obviously many of the voters went this way, who just reject that notion. A guy who plays 86 or even 102 games or 70, whatever, like Wallner, cannot be the team MVP. I get it. I understand. I'm not saying there's something wrong with that logic, and it's something I weighed, believe me. But then you go to the opposite end of the spectrum and you say, well, I'm going to choose their most durable guys. Right. Well, they really only had 4 of them. Right. You had Carlos Santana, Willie Castro on the hitting side, and you had Bailey Ober and Pablo Lopez on the starter side. Now, there were relievers like Griffin Jacks, who were year-long contributors, obviously, and was really great. And I did, for a moment, consider Griffin Jacks as the MVP. But
he finished second on mine.
Right. But here's the thing. Griffin Jacks was pitched 70 innings, which is a lot for a reliever. He was involved in 276 plate appearances. That's 91 fewer than Correa, 112 fewer than Buxton, and 400 or 500 fewer than Ober or Lopez. And obviously, Correa and Buxton are also adding value defensively that Griffin Jacks, while he's a fine defensive pitcher, are not adding. So when your only kind of durability options are Ober and Lopez, who finished the season with 175 innings, they were good, but they had ERAs around 4. Yep. And they both, weren't consistently good. They both had stretches, especially at the end of the season. They had a couple of clunkers. Jax, who was great as a reliever, but again, fewer than 300 plate appearances. So if you're docking Buxton and Correa and all those guys, and then Castro and Santana, who Castro had a 102 OPS plus, which means he was 2% better than the average hitter.
Right.
Correa had like a 150, something like that.
Right.
And then Santana was a 109 OPS plus, which means he's 9% better than the average hitter, except he's a first baseman, that's basically average at first base. And I'm not denigrating those guys' seasons. They had really good seasons for them.
Right.
And they played.
And they stayed healthy. And
they played 150 plus games on a team that needed that. Right. Don't get me wrong. And Santana was phenomenal defensively. Yep. And Castro, while not phenomenal defensively, his defensive flexibility
was phenomenal.
Allowed them to go forward despite some of these injuries and slumps because they could just plug him in wherever. I'm not discounting that value. However, I chose to take the approach that the most valuable player on the team, when there's not an obvious pick, when there's not a great performer who was also durable, and there just wasn't, I didn't want to pick a guy who played a lot and was average-ish or slightly above average-ish. Yeah. To me, that just didn't fit my personal, again, definition of a team MVP. So what I ended up doing was I ranked. We only just vote for the winner, by the way. It's not ranked choice ballot.
Oh, okay.
Should be. I'd like that, actually.
Yeah.
That would solve some things, I think, in my mind. Maybe I'll bring that up at our meeting. I think we're having a meeting Tuesday. But
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, maybe? How many would you bet? How many would you do?
I mean, I always do 10, but you don't need 10. 5's fine. 3 would be fine, honestly.
10 is fine if you're doing it for the entire American League.
Which is what you do. I had voted for MVP, AL MVP like 2 years ago, or last year maybe, and it was, you vote for 10 spots. Like Rookie of the Year, which is what I have this year, or had this year, I already voted, is 3 spots. And I think Cy Young is 5 spots, so I think somewhere in that range. So I voted for Correa, and if it would have been a fuller ballot, I would have Buxton second, Griffin Jax third, and then Santana and Castro 4, 5, basically interchangeably in that order, kind of like we talked about them, and then Ober Lopez 6, 7. For the reasons that we just sort of talked about. Like those were, I had the 2 standouts who didn't play a lot, but were clearly their best players. I mean, anybody saying Carlos Correa wasn't their best player wasn't watching. I mean, he very obviously was the Twins' best player. So then it comes down to availability and total value context. But he led the team in WAR, win probability. Buxton was second in those categories.
There clearly was no standout, and I think basically you could involve as many as 6 or 7 guys in that award it without feeling too ashamed.
Here's what I'll tell you. I don't know the exact figures. Somebody told me, but I didn't write it down or anything. If there were like 18 votes, let's say, something like that, or 18 voters, at least 5 guys received votes.
Right.
And the winner, who we can just say was Willie Castro, I believe received 4 votes.
Okay.
So he was named team MVP because 4 people who cover the team, sort of.
Do you know what they do if there's a tie?
Yeah, we did because there was a tie last year for, might have been for MVP, I think, which Sonny Gray won last year.
Okay.
But I believe there was a tie with like him and Royce Lewis or something.
Okay.
I can't remember. I voted for Sonny Gray. And what we did was, did we mud wrestle to break the tie? No, it was some kind of runoff or something like that. Like you could only vote for, I forget, or they did rank. Maybe we did ranked choice. I don't remember at that point. But my point is not to call into question the voting because I'm involved in it, obviously. Sure. And you could expand that pool, but I don't know how you would really expand it without opening it up to, a lot of people who don't necessarily cover the team, but that's fine too in some ways. But I guess what I mean to say is the difficulty I had trying to come up with a choice, and I ultimately went with a flawed choice that I don't really even feel great about, but I just felt like, am I really going to say that Willie Castro was better than Carlos Correa?
Right.
And I just couldn't pull the trigger on that. 4 people could, and that got him the MVP.
Right.
Now, I know that Correa got 3 votes at least. And I'm assuming he didn't get 4 because he would have tied Castro. It might have been 4 or 5 for Castro. I don't remember. But at least 5, and I think maybe 6 guys got at least 1 vote out of 18 votes, which really tells you that everyone dealt with the same difficulty of this team, that this team was really a weird team. Yeah. And also you toss in the collapse too, and it's like what do we even want to give individual awards for this thing for?
Right,
But, I mean, they gave awards for 100 lost teams. So.
Yeah, I ended up struggling a lot with which one's Daily awarded it to Correa, by the way.
Right.
The
beat writers and the bloggers, we all agree.
I don't know how many people they had. How many of our writers ended up voting? I think
You have more writers than the BBWA has members. I'm certain of that.
I'm sure, for sure. I just don't know how many of them voted.
Yeah. 70, probably 80,
That's right.
200. There's 12 Codys, as we just established on the Patreon. There's more Codys than there are BBWA members.
That's right. We've got. I would have put Correa first. I would have put Jack second, Buxton third.
Yeah, so
right.
Similar to what I had.
After that, I was actually I had Ober. I think fourth. I had Ryan fifth, which I get why you wouldn't, because he ended up missing.
Right. I mean, he was literally absent for the last
quarter, but he had 135 innings of 3.6 ERA. Like, I would have put him above Lopez in terms of that.
I mean, Lopez was pretty damn good when Ryan was out.
Well,
he had a stretch where he went 7-1 with a 1-something ERA,
and then Santana and Castro were the other two that I just had.
I
had
Joe Ryan ninth. I had Wallner and then Joe Ryan. So, I mean, very similar lists, obviously.
I had Wallner ninth. Right?
I mean, essentially the same list. And we didn't confer. John and I don't confer really.
No.
But yeah, I have no problem with Willie Castro winning.
Yeah, I don't either.
What I will say, and I do like the idea.
We were a little surprised when we saw that.
Yeah.
The Twins Daily Slack channel was like, hold up, what? But
once I started asking people, and I started getting like wildly different answers. Like, I would just go, "Who are you voting for?"
Right.
And they'd be like, Carlos Santana. And I'd be like, "Really? Oh, man. Okay. I mean, I get it." Like, similar argument to Castro.
Right. Yeah,
actually, I would have voted if they said to me, "You got to vote for a full-time guy, a guy who played the whole season," I would have voted for Santana over Castro.
I
think he was a better hitter and a much better defender. Now, he wasn't as versatile, obviously.
When I do this, what I first do is I go and I rank the hitters together, the relievers together, and the pitchers together, right? So I'm just comparing hitters to hitters and stuff, right? And I had Santana and Castro as basically a dead tie, but I gave Santana number 3 and I gave Castro number 4.
And so I'm asking people, and I had multiple people, Jacks, and I'm like, okay, I get that.
Yep.
Like, if you're just saying high leverage, he pitched the whole year, and you're not concerned about 276 plate appearances. People named Ober and Lopez, and I'm like, okay, well, you needed starting pitching. They answered the bell every fifth day and were really good. And then obviously Buxton, Correa. I could have even seen an argument for like Matt Wallner or something like that. I mean, if you're choosing guys who just tried in the second half and had huge production when everyone else failed.
Right. In the same way that we tend to value relievers because they are valuable when you need them the most at the end of the year, or at the end of the game, you can do the same thing with the hitters. Like, you can absolutely say, listen, the performance in the last 2 months is what really counted. And it turns out that that's Wallner, right?
Except it didn't really count because they still lost.
You're right.
But that was part of the reason that I personally wouldn't have voted and didn't vote for Willie Castro, is that, yes, he played 150-something games and he led the team in plate appearances by far. But he was pretty bad after the All-Star break.
That's right.
He was playing banged up. Yep. He continued to play every day. They started sliding him down to the bottom of the order against lefties because he went through a stretch where he was like 2 for 50 against lefties.
Right.
He didn't have an impact as a runner this year really at all. He got thrown out quite a bit. I don't think his defense, it was as flexible as ever. I don't think it was as good as ever.
Yep.
I think there were a couple spots where he just wasn't very good. And also, if we're so focused on, Correa missed most of the second half and Buxton missed time in the second half and all that. Well, Castro didn't miss time, but he hit like 210 with a 600 OPS. Like, did that really help? Was him being in the lineup? Yeah, they needed somebody in the lineup. So I don't know.
This is one of those things
where made it very difficult.
What's interesting, I think this year's group makes it even clearer than it normally is that that the votes and who gets them reveal more about the voters than they do about the players themselves, right? That, each of these players had, shining things that were good and things and blemishes, right? And where you end up ranking them reveals what you value or don't value and what you saw or didn't see.
Yeah.
Or what you paid attention to. It reflects that person's values, I think, more than it reflects the player's actual.
I mean, that's always going to sort of be the case.
Right.
Like even
but
if you look
my point is, I think that is always the case.
Yeah.
Right. But this year, because there were so many candidates and because there were so many positives and negatives for each one of them, it becomes even more clear.
Yes. And, there's been this is my 5th year voting for this, I think. I want to say 4th or 5th. And there's been most of the time, in my mind, it's obvious like who the MVP should be. But even last year when I thought Sonny Gray was the obvious MVP, he wasn't obvious to the voting block. But to your point, whether it's like the Correa voters versus the Castro voters this year or people who didn't vote for Sonny Gray last year, I could probably identify them without knowing. Or at least say that they were the Correa voters are obviously like-minded with me. I could probably identify who they were. It doesn't surprise me that the Twins Daily crew collectively chose Correa.
Sure, right.
Because
we can look at WAR, WPA
exactly.
like everybody, right?
And it doesn't surprise me that maybe more of the older voting block values the availability and they grinded through it and all that stuff.
And by the way, that's legitimate. Sure. That's a legitimate piece too.
But yeah, but what did surprise me is I'd ask somebody and they'd be like Jax, and I'd be like, really? Or Santana, and I'd be like,
or Ober,
right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was a strange season. Certainly, I don't want to say it's a weak MVP because there are if you go to the press box, there's a plaque for each of these awards, and every year it's like the Stanley Cup. They just sketch in the name of the next winner. So there's been 50 of them or whatever. Right. I don't necessarily think it started immediately in the 60s, but it might have. Certainly since the 70s, I think. And you look at some and it's like Kirby Puckett won it 7 times out of 10 years and all that stuff. But you forget that in the 90s, when I was a child going to the Metrodome, they had spots where people were having this type of argument that we just had involving Pat Mears and I don't even know Scott Stahoviak,
Ron Coomer.
Yeah, Ron Coomer. He probably is.
He probably did. Yeah,
he was an all-star for them twice, which is absurd if you go back and look at the numbers. And so Correa,
it might also just been Brad Radke.
Yeah, you're right. I should look what it is, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
And Correa, from a just performance standpoint, is going to be in the upper echelon of Twins MVPs.
Sure.
He got almost 4 wins above replacement in half a season. He had a second best year of his career, which is going to be a borderline Hall of Fame career.
Right.
150-something OPS plus, which means he's 50% better than the league average. At shortstop, that's incredible. He was the 3rd best hitting shortstop in the league behind Bobby Witt, who's going to finish runner-up for the MVP,
right.
and Gunnar Henderson, who's probably going to finish 3rd or 4th.
Right.
He stacks up with pretty much any MVP, but he only played 86 games. So,
right.
yeah. Let's go through the other awards real quick, just to not as interesting, obviously. But Pitcher of the Year.
Jax.
Yes, Jax won. I voted for Ober.
Yeah.
But
you can make the case either way.
But, it's funny. I put Jax ahead of Ober on the MVP.
Yeah.
Because I viewed MVP, and maybe this is just semantically tying yourself into knots or whatever. But I know Phil felt the same way.
I was going to say, I know at least one beat writer who put Ober down as MVP as their number one pick,
right.
but picked Jax as their pitcher of the year.
Yeah, I'm not as crazy as Phil, but I'm halfway there because my feeling was, who was the best, most valuable, producing pitcher? Well, Ober. He threw 2.5 times as many innings as Jax. Sure. Other than the first start of the season and that one bad start late, he was a 3.40 ERA guy for 30 starts. He threw 180 innings, whatever it was. But in terms of actual impact, Jax pitched his 70 innings were probably worth 2 times that because they were all high leverage innings. I mean, he very rarely pitched in a spot that wasn't a tie game or a tight game, and he was phenomenal in those spots. He was one of probably the 3 or 5 best relievers to me in all of baseball this year. Certainly one of the top 3, let's say, non-closer relievers, although he did some closing. And so the impact of his performance was bigger than the innings total would suggest because his innings were each more valuable or more consequential, let's say, than Ober's. Now, again, that might just be a semantic pretzel that I twisted myself into, but that was my thinking on it.
Right.
And so I voted for Ober. You know, if you'd asked me a day later, I might have voted for Jax. If you'd asked me a day earlier, I might have voted for Lopez, whatever. I think those three, to me, were viable as the pitcher of the year. And it ended up
Those are the only those two got, I think, 11 of the 12 first place votes in the Twins Daily.
Okay.
First, right.
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
Jax ended up winning.
Yeah, I have no problem with that at all. You know, I had Jax third on the team MVP thing, so he won with that. Rookie of the year was the easiest vote ever of all time since I had AL MVP vote and Ohtani. You know, hit 50 homers and almost won the Cy Young. That was an easy one. Simeon Woods Richardson. It has to be.
Right.
I mean, I know he ran out of gas at the end, obviously, but he saved their ass in such a way in April, May, June, and July.
So many of these guys we're talking about saved their ass. Griffin Jack saved their ass.
Yeah.
Bailey Ober saved their ass. Simeon Woods Richardson saved their ass.
This ended up being the reason that like Santana and Castro stand out is because everyone else either got hurt or flopped down the stretch. So the two guys that didn't fully stand out. The reason that Jack stands out is because like guys like Duran and some relievers never even did much for them, kind of collapsed, but he stayed at the forefront. Excellent. And, you know, Simeon Woods Richardson, yes, he faded down the stretch, which was not surprising for a 23-year-old rookie who had never thrown that many innings and wasn't even being counted on to be in the rotation coming into the season. The fact that he got past like 140 innings and kind of, you know, was running on fumes a little bit is not surprising. But he had like a 3.5 ERA through his first 20-something starts at a time when they lost DeSclafani and then ditched Varland because he was so bad early on. They just handed that to Simeon Woods Richardson. And if you would have given Baldelli and Falvey, et cetera, some truth serum, they probably would have told you, we're hoping to get a few good starts out of him. Like he might flop too, and then it's on to the next one, whether that was Festa or whoever. Instead, he was fantastic. Now, they shielded him. You know, he went 4 or 5 innings most of the time. He didn't go third time through the lineup, all that stuff. But he was so consistently solid for them at a time when they just desperately needed that 5th spot in the rotation. And then especially when Paddock also went down. Right. To just be competent consistently.
Eventually they needed the 3rd spot.
Well, yeah, that's where it kind of fell a little bit. But so, yeah, he was an easy vote. And, I mean, there were no other rookies in my mind that, you know, Brooks Lee didn't do much as a rookie. Right. Austin Martin wasn't super impressive as a rookie. Right. Most of the other young guys were not rookie eligible, guys like Wallner, or Lewis, or whatever. So that was an easy vote. Most improved player, which I like that better than comeback player, which the actual MLB wide award that's similar is comeback player. Right. Because then it's like, am I supposed to pick a guy who came back from injury? Am I supposed to pick a guy who came back from a steroid suspension, personal problems, just a bad season? What are you supposed to do? Most improved is pretty obvious. Like who was the most improved from last year, basically, or just big picture overall. There was a few different votes on this. I think you could have gone with Larnach, for instance, who went from a guy they couldn't trust to one of their best hitters. Yes. And played a career high, I think 112 games or something like that. There were a lot of guys that if you would have held this voting on August 1st, would have been picks. Right. Jose Miranda, you are correct, for instance. Right. You know, I think even Jax, you could make an argument, he went from very good to amazing. That's true. But the guy I settled on and the guy who ended up winning, I believe by 1 vote, is Cole Sands. Yeah. Because to me, Cole Sands... He won ours too. Went from afterthought last year, but even coming into spring training, even coming into opening day. We talked about the Cole Sands role being the up and down. You're sent to AAA, you come back, you're a long man, you throw 3 innings one day, you go back to St. Paul for 3 weeks, you come back. That's what I envisioned for him because that's the role he's filled for the previous 2 years. He was a converted starter. He had pretty good stuff. He struggled to throw strikes. They couldn't really count on him the past 2 years in anything of a prominent relief role. So he was treated mostly as like a mop-up, long relief, that sort of thing. I think he came into this year with that as the plan again. Right. But 2 things happened. 1, they were immediately down Duran. 2, guys like Topa contributed nothing. Then Stewart broke down. And then real big thing was he was just awesome.
Yeah, right.
And he was great from start to finish in a variety of roles. First, he was being used sort of middle innings, multiple innings like he had been in the past. And I remember sitting in Baldelli's office probably in May, and Baldelli was like, yeah, we're not using him as a long reliever anymore.
No.
He's too good for that.
Right.
We're going to start to use him as a sixth inning guy, a seventh inning guy.
Right.
By the end of the season, it was him, Jax, and Duran.
Yeah, he was one of the three.
And there were certainly points where I trusted him more than Duran. He threw strikes, which had been a big challenge for him.
He did give us some home runs.
Yeah, but he had an 85 to 12 strikeout to walk ratio,
Yeah, right.
which is just phenomenal.
Yeah, he looked.
And he pitched in key spots.
The truth is his peripheral stats are even more impressive
Yes.
than his regular stats. His regular stats are plenty impressive, right?
Yeah, and I know part of the struggle for him down the stretch, one, he had a knee injury the last couple of weeks, which he tried to pitch through,
Okay.
or the last week, 10 days, whatever. But he was also just sort of learning what it means to go from being a starter or a long reliever where your focus is on bulk innings,
Right.
and you know each time you pitch, you're going to have 3, 4, 5 days between the next time, to now pitching back-to-backs, 3 out of 4,
Yeah.
4 out of 6. You know, he was used pretty heavily because
Yes,
they
he
needed
was.
him to.
Right.
And he held up for the most part, but I know that was a struggle for, not a struggle, but something he had to sort of learn or experience. Yeah. And by the end of the season, he was just a really good setup man. And to go from an afterthought to a really good setup man, by the way, on a team that desperately needed that,
Right.
I think he should get all the awards. Like, I think that is
did a nice job.
a perfect award.
We gave him first. We had Larnach second,
Yeah.
and then we actually had Simeon with Richardson as third. Which,
Yeah,
I mean,
that's viable too.
I mean, you could certainly point out him as a
Yeah,
most improved.
I
considering-
guess I shied away from considering rookies because it's like, what are they improving on,
Right.
basically?
Yes.
But he did get a lot better than he was at Triple A.
Right, yeah,
but I kind of feel like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, okay,
there can be a fair amount of overlap between those two awards.
right. But yeah, Larnach was viable too, like I said. If we would have done a 3-person ballot, he would have been second on my ballot for sure. And then,
And I like your point that might have been totally different on August 1st.
yeah, I mean, Miranda would have won it
And
on
an
August
All-Star
1st.
break for sure, right?
Yeah, I mean, probably. He was terrible
Yeah,
last
he
year, and he was
was,
injured last year, and he was sporting a 120-something, 130 OPS. He had that 12 at
Right.
plate appearance hitting streak around that time, and then he just flopped down the stretch. Defensive player of the year, easy for me, Santana. I think he's swept,
for sure,
probably.
yeah.
Now, you could vote for like Vasquez if you wanted to. I thought Buxton was pretty great in center field.
Sure.
I thought Correa was great at shortstop, but again, for only 86 games. I don't think he was as good as he was in the past, but I think he was really good, especially compared to the fill-in shortstops that we saw. But Santana was, I think, and my memories of Doug Minkiewicz are childhood memories or teenager memories, and they're also 25 years old or 20 years old at this point. But in terms of the time I've been a Twins fan, post Herbeck, let's say, so like mid-90s on, those are the only, if you said who are the best defensive first basemen of the last 25 years, those are the only two choices. Carlos Santana and Doug Minkiewicz. And they did it in different ways. But I was just so blown away with how consistently awesome Carlos Santana was. And I've watched him play. I mean, he played the Twins a million times when he was with Cleveland. And he was really good. And he had a really good defensive reputation. And they signed him largely for the defense. And throughout spring training, Baldelli was constantly saying he's great defensively. I can't wait to use him.
Yeah.
He's going. And I was
He
like,
was much better than I thought he was.
yes,
Yeah.
I thought he'd be good. He was phenomenal. Like I think he should win a Gold Glove easily. I don't know when that gets announced, but I assume he will. Eye test matched the stats. He led the American League in runs saved and outs above average and all that stuff. So that to me was, other than Rookie of the Year, that was the second easiest.
Sure. Yeah.
And then last but not least, Media Good Guy, which it's basically one of two things. It's who's the best quote, in that who's talkative and willing to discuss things on and off the record.
When other people don't want to, especially.
Right. Treats the media, I don't want to say well, because I don't think I really care about that, but treats them not with disdain.
Sure.
Like when you approach them after a loss, they don't spit on your shoes and walk away. But also the biggest thing for me that I've learned in the 4 or 5 years actually being around this team in the clubhouse and stuff is There are certain guys after a tough loss or tough stretch, or for instance, when the team collapses over the span of 7 weeks, who make themselves available and stand front and center, often in front of the camera, and give answers.
Right.
Not just about themselves, but about the state of the team. And you got to be a veteran to do that.
Sure.
You're not going to be Brooks Lee's not going to sit up there and do that. But there are some guys who do that, and there are some guys who don't. There are some guys that you can go to even off the record and say, what's wrong with so-and-so? Or what's wrong? What happened yesterday? Or what? There are some guys who are good at that and willing to do that, and there are some guys who aren't. And that's kind of the basis of this award. Although it's a little bit like a comeback play of the year in that if you ask 15 writers what they're really judging this on, it's going to be different.
Sure.
But the winner was Ryan Jeffers, who we've joked on the show before is he's a yapper.
Yes. Right.
Which as a yapper myself, I appreciate that. Here's what I'll say about Ryan Jeffers. When things are going good, Ryan Jeffers loves to talk and will give you funny quotes and is a guy who will joke around about other players and all sorts of stuff. But when things are going bad for him individually or the team, he's still front and center in front of his locker. He's willing to go on the record. You can ask him tough questions. And then also being a catcher, you can ask him about the pitching staff too.
Yeah, that's right.
And he will give you meaningful answers, good and bad.
Thoughtful.
Yes.
Yeah.
What our
He's a
approach
thoughtful
was on
guy.
that pitch.
Right.
What our approach was against this lineup. Why did so-and-so throw a lot of sliders today? Why did so-and-so not? What did you think of a guy getting removed after 5 innings? All that sort of thing. And so he's also just a good talker, and he gives good quotes, and that's part of it, unfortunately. And so he was the winner. I don't think that was a unanimous or anything. I know some people voted for Pablo Lopez.
Sure.
It's a little weird to
I think
vote
he
for.
won it last year, didn't he?
Yes, I think. Which we try to spread it around, I think,
Right.
a little bit.
Yeah,
Although I'm
yeah,
sure if
sure,
you
sure.
look, I'm sure Michael Kadire won it like 11 years in a row or something. But or Kyle Gibson probably back then.
Maybe.
I gotta take a picture of the plaque so we can actually have a frame of reference for this stuff. But I thought, first of all, Pablo Lopez is the nicest person I've ever met in my entire life. I've talked about that before.
Sure.
And he's a really good quote too. But most of the time we're only talking to him after his start
Right.
about himself. And he's not going to talk about the lineup, obviously. He's not going to talk about other pitchers that much. He can talk about the state of the team. And so I thought Jeffers not only is a good quote and is a willing participant with the media, but he's one of the few guys who can talk about his own hitting, the lineup overall, and the pitching. Because it's really just him and Vasquez who can do that. Right. And not that Vasquez isn't media friendly, but he's just not as, gregarious. He's not as much of a yapper, at least to us. Some of the biggest yappers on the team, by the way, are not big yappers when people are holding microphones in front of them.
Right, yeah. That's
Which
true.
I don't blame them for that.
No, of course. They don't trust themselves to
Right.
with microphones in front of themselves, right.
The perception in that clubhouse of Byron Buxton when he's being interviewed and when he's not being interviewed is much different.
Right, that's true.
Max Kepler, same thing. I mean, there are some guys who are like life of the party until me and Hayes show up in front of them, and then they're just like, yes, no, whatever,
Right.
which is fine. So that was the vote for that. I think that's all that matters. Like I said, Royce Lewis won the Community Service Award. Correa won the Leadership Award,
Okay.
which I think I voted for Pablo on that, but whatever. I don't claim to know leadership and stuff. All right, so let's talk about a less fun topic, which is the LVPs, the least valuable participants.
Pickers.
Good one. Thank you.
That's right.
The LVPs are John Bonus and Aaron Gleeman.
Right.
Every year around spring training, as sort of a Twins preview, but really season preview, MLB wide, we make over/under picks based on the Vegas betting lines for all of the
We
American
do
League
this
teams.
to sort of preview the American League.
Yes.
Let's go through each of the teams, talk about what they did, what they didn't do during the offseason, what our expectations are for that team for the regular season coming up. And we do that using over/under numbers because it provides us a nice objective reality against which to base it, right? It's not a rhetorical exercise.
We always
It becomes
use the
extra
example of the Verlander, Cabrera, Leland era, Dombrowski era Tigers, who were a dominant team, for 5 years in that division, made a couple World Series. And every year we would argue about them, and one of us would be high, thought they were too high on them, thought the other one was too low, whatever. And then at the end we'd have a 20-minute argument about it. And at the end we go, well, how many wins do you think they'll have?
Yeah, ultimately we try
both
to give
go
it a number.
90.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what was this argument for?
Right.
So we use the over-under as a sort of a argument stopper a little bit.
That's right. So it did not go well this year for us.
Here's the thing. Before we read these horrific results, I actually don't know what they are specifically, but I know they're bad.
Right.
Two things. One, we've been bad at this now 2 years in a row, like really bad at it.
Right.
Prior to that, you were pretty good at it, and I had like a 3-year run. But this is going to sound like tooting my own horn, but it's not because I've been terrible at it the last 2 years. I went, I think, 13-2 one year, and I think another year I was 11-4. And I think over a 3-year stretch, I picked like 75% correct. I don't know what happened between then and now.
That's part of what we're going to talk about here.
Right. Other than maybe I'm just stupid. I do think, I will say this. Back then, my job was at either Baseball Prospectus or NBC Sports. And my job was actually not covering the Twins.
Sure.
It was to cover all teams. And I was much more familiar with the inner workings and the news around every team. And now, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been Twins focused.
Yeah.
Although I also got the Twins over on the wrong this year too. Although that
everybody does.
We were right on the money until 6 weeks left.
That's it.
But the other thing I think that has happened, and we found this when I was at Baseball Prospectus as editor-in-chief for 4 years, I think, and their big preseason product is Pacoda projections. And it's a, behind the curtain projection system with all sorts of different proprietary things.
It projects players' performances for the upcoming year and then basically assigns here's how much playing time we think they're going to have, and therefore this is how many wins that team will have.
There are like 2 or 3 well-known projection systems.
Right.
That is one of them, and that is probably the oldest. One of them goes back like 20 years. That was what people cited as projection.
Nate Silver helped. Right. Original cut his teeth on projections.
Yeah, they created a monster. Yeah, didn't but so what we found 5 years ago or 8 years ago at Baseball Prospectus was that the gap between it used to be every year Pacoda would issue their 30-team projections on whatever date, February 1st, whatever it was. And people would compare them to the over-unders in Vegas, and there'd be 10 teams that had a 5-win gap, and there would be some teams that had a 10-win gap. And there were all these sort of inefficiencies where you're like, oh man, Pacoda thinks so-and-so is going to be really bad, but Vegas thinks they're going to win 85 games. That's where the money can be made.
Sure.
But what I noticed even during the 3 or 4 years I was at Prospectus, that gap shrunk to the point it was almost non-existent.
Right.
Like every Pagoda projection, and I'll go even Fangraphs, which has a Zips projection, which is really good too, are within 1 or 2 wins of the Vegas over-unders. And so there's...
By the way, when we go through these at the beginning of the year with the preview,
yes,
among the other the things that we quote as we're trying to figure out what's going on are the Pagoda projections.
Those projections. And I even do the Fangraphs projections. And we do last year's record. We do, it's a good show, I think.
Yeah.
But, and I'm not suggesting that they're like cribbing off of each other. There's no Vegas is waiting to see what Pacoda does.
No.
That's not the case. Instead, what is happening is the people who are making the projections at both places used to be much different types of people.
Right.
They used to be these guys in some back room with cigar smoke setting the lines on stuff, the old, what you think of as the old school Vegas and everything, whereas Pacoda was Nate Silvers of the world.
Well, also, I mean, those lines in Vegas tend to move if a lot of money comes in on one side versus the other side. And now the people who are making those bets are also using those projections.
True, but that's a chicken or the egg thing. What I'm saying is that the actual projections themselves on both sides are essentially being made by the same type of people with the similar methodology and the same type, the system, the projection systems.
It's no longer a market inefficiency.
Right. And here's how I know that to be true, more than just speculation. One of the people who used to be in charge partly of Pacoda projections works for one of the major casinos in Vegas setting their lines and has for 10 years.
Right.
And I know this because one time he offered me a job and I really considered it. And then I thought, I don't think I'll make it a year living in Vegas. They'll just find me at the Bellagio.
That's, my goodness.
4 a.m.
That's right.
With chips strewn.
That's
anyway,
right. Playing poker.
So those are all the excuses before I tell you that we flopped, and I specifically flopped. But okay, let's go through this quickly.
I'm gonna
Put it out of the misery.
I'm gonna give you one more piece of overview on it's one of the things that shocked us to some extent, or surprised us at least as we made these, is how in sync we were. Like we basically we got. I think what happened was, and I've got to actually listen to the end of this episode. We got to the end and we picked all 15 exactly the same.
Right,
and I switched one.
We don't
and
confer
that one,
on this at all.
And that one that I
right?
switched is the difference between you and me. So I'll get to that one last. That is in the Western Division.
Should we start with the Twins division?
We'll start with the Twins. Twins over-under was 85.5, and we both picked the over, and we both bet on it because we make ourselves bet on it.
Yeah, what we do is we pick the over. We make a pick for all 15 teams, and then 2 or 3 teams in each division we kind of place an emphasis on, and we say we actually bet on it.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of those will be like, well, I think it's going to be this, but we don't really know it. It's a good number. Target. We would never bet on it.
So the Twins won 82.
And we
now
85.
They were on pace for the over for about 96% of the season.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly.
That was a flop.
So if they instead of going 12 and 27, they go 16 and 23 over those last 40 games, we end up winning.
Right. As of mid-August or even early September, you were looking pretty safe on that. I probably would have, if you would have said you want to double down on that, I probably would have done it and lost more money.
That's right. Cleveland's number was 80.5. They obviously crushed that. They ended up with 91. We both picked the over on that.
Hey,
we both picked the over on 80.5. Basically, with the discussion around that was, they haven't traded away everybody that we thought they'd trade away this offseason. Right. They're going to be a little bit better, and there has to be a good second team in the division. They're probably the one.
Yeah. All right, let's focus on that. Okay. I'm glad we got we got the division winner right.
Right.
What more could you ask
Neither
for?
of us bet on it.
No, but betting's bad for you anyway.
That's right. Detroit was supposed to be better than Cleveland. They had a higher number. They were 81.5.
Yeah.
They ended up finishing 86.
Yeah.
So they ended up hitting the over. We did not believe in Detroit. We both thought that was...
Here's what I remember from that, and it will go to your next one, which is Kansas City. But I remember coming into this discussion when we got to the Central and we were making our picks, saying, I don't know why people are so high on Kansas City.
Right.
I think Detroit is the threat to have sort of a big step forward this year. And yet, I still took the under on them.
Yeah.
And then I was...
Well, that was a high number.
Yeah. But, I mean, I thought Detroit was going to be much better than Kansas City. So not only was I still wrong about Detroit, slightly, like only by a handful of games, I was about as wrong about Kansas City as you could possibly be.
Yeah, which gets us to Kansas City. Kansas City was 73.5 was their over-under. They won 86 as well, same as Detroit.
Yeah.
We both picked the under. We both bet against them. Neither of us believed in Kansas City.
I mean, they beat that cases by like July.
Right.
Not really, but like by August they beat that.
Right. Well, I mean, what we did is we had the discussion about a long discussion about Kansas City saying, yeah, they've signed some people, but they signed Michael Wacha.
Yeah. Who ended up having a great year.
He had a great year. Lugo.
Now, it helps that Bobby Witt Jr. went from really good to the third best player in the entire world.
Right.
That helped them a lot. And Lugo was really good. Wacha was really good. I mean, they had a brilliant offseason if you look back on it. Yep. And I did not give them nearly enough credit. I was very, very wrong about them.
Yeah, and I think one of the projection systems was pretty down on them too. It might have been baseball perspective.
Nobody saw them winning whatever.
Okay. Yeah. And then finally the White Sox, who had a number of 60.5, which we both thought was incredibly low.
Yeah.
And because that was so incredibly low, we said we're going to bet against them.
Yeah.
And they ended up winning 41.
Yeah. That's another one that was safe by about June. That we were wrong.
We picked the over on the White Sox.
60.5 is just to be projected or to have over under of 100 plus losses.
Right.
It's just so rare, and yet they cleared that with such ease.
Right.
Even actually, they played okay down the stretch and still cleared it with ease.
I think what freaked us out there was 60.5. Like that, we both were just like, oh, boy, they're going to be bad, but I don't know if they're going to be that bad.
Yeah.
And we weren't even totally sure.
So my takeaway is we brilliantly foresaw the winner of the division, which is really all that matters. And then kind of the also run
Except
guys.
for the Twins. He said it wasn't the Twins.
We got all wrong. So we went 1-4 there.
That's right.
But we got the winner. That's
right.
all that matters.
Yeah. 1-4, and you went 0-2 on your bets, and I went 0-4 on my
Let's not get
bets.
into okay. It's like what we did is we missed the entire rack in the 3-point shootout, but we hit the money ball.
Right.
We went 0 for whatever and hit the money ball.
Well, and what we do on these, a lot of times is we're like, listen, if we can pick the best couple of teams, we almost always lean towards the over, and if we can pick the worst couple of teams, we almost always lean toward the under. And what has happened is Vegas has ended up seeing that, and in general, I think that was the way things were going. And now they are just hitting really high overs and really low unders for some of these teams. That's what freaked us out with the White Sox.
One other thing, especially because we limit ourselves to picking the American League. Imagine how bad we'd have gone 0 for 15 in the National. Maybe we'd have gone better in the National League, just flipping coins, basically. Because that's the thing. These are coin flips. Right. There's no inherent advantage here to setting the over under. You should go 50% basically over a long haul. But I will say this about the American League. Number one, as you just said, the White Sox were not bad. They were historically bad. They were the worst record in modern history. That's a lot of extra wins that are being distributed.
Right.
And yet, despite that, this was the first year in a very long time nobody won more than, 94 games or something like that?
Wow. Yeah.
And so despite having the most extreme losing team, which basically distributes an extra 20 wins to everyone else.
Yeah, you're right.
You still had a very closed loop,
right.
which I think does affect some of this a little bit.
All right, East.
More excuses for my horrible performance.
In the East. Yankees were supposed to win that division. They had a 92.5 number. We talked a lot about I did not see that coming because they had such a poor year in 2023. I did not expect a 92.5. So I was absolutely all over the under. You are also on the under, in part because both of us were taking a look at the Yankees at the spring training going, how's their starting pitching going to hold up? Rodon was hurt all of last year. Garrett Cole entered the year injured. Yeah. We kind of thought their pitching isn't going to hold up. And instead,
their pitching was pretty good, and Judge was the best player in the world.
And even then, they only exceeded their over-under by 1.5 games. Right. And they hit the over.
It's only half a loss.
Though. Right? Second in that division was supposed to be Baltimore at 90.5. They won
88?
91. They barely beat the over.
Yeah.
We both hit it.
Hey!
I think we both thought that they were going to be the best team in the division.
Yeah,
I did. And they ended up being.
And they were back and forth till the end with the Yankees.
That's right. That's right.
First place.
But if they lose one more game, we're even more dismal results.
How can I spin this? It was important that we knew the Orioles. Oh, because of Matt Borgschulte. That gives us an edge in terms of knowing about Matt Borgschulte because we knew the Orioles.
Third was supposed to be the Toronto Blue Jays at 87.5.
Yeah.
They were the most disappointing team, second most disappointing team in the American League. White Sox are the most disappointing compared to their over-under.
Not for me. I loved it.
Yeah, exactly.
But
they were 13.5 games short of that. They only won 74 games. Yeah. We kind of took a look at them and said, they're going to basically kind of run it back.
Yeah.
We feel pretty good about them running it back. Neither of us felt real strong about it because 87.5 is a high number.
Yeah.
But we both picked the over. We didn't bet on it, and we were wrong. Yeah. Let's see.
The Rays.
Next was supposed to be the Rays. And the Rays conversation goes the way the conversation always goes. You berated yourself for not picking the over for them last year.
I took the over on the Rays for the first 10 years we did this.
Right.
Because I felt they were always undervalued because people always looked at the veterans they lost and said, how are they going to replace them? And then they always win 88 games. Yeah. So last year, I was like, I just don't see it. I'm going to take the under, and they beat it.
Yeah.
And then I kicked myself.
2023, you mean?
Yeah,
right,
2023. Yeah. And so I this year I just said, you know what? No matter what it is, I'm going to take the over on the Rays because I don't want to be an idiot.
I think you've picked the under on the Rays twice in the 12 years of this podcast, and you were wrong.
And what happened? I took the over.
We picked the over. We both picked the over. We both bet on the over, and we were both wrong. I mean, that team won 100 games or something in 2023, and this year they won 80.
Right. They also traded guys at the deadline, which I was not really expecting. But they had a lot of pitching injuries.
Well, they traded guys at the deadline though because they were crummy.
They were above 500 at the deadline.
Were they still at 500? Yes. Okay.
They had a 15%, 20% playoff odds. They had higher playoff odds than the team they traded guys to, which was the Cubs.
And then they had the Red Sox. Red Sox were supposed to be 77.5. I think we both looked at them as being, this is going to be the worst team in that division. Right. There's no way they're going to do it. Instead, they ended up being semi-competitive until they kind of fell apart at the end, similar to the Twins actually. Won 81 games still, which exceeded at 3.5, and so we both picked the under. I bet the under.
So we got one right in each division.
We got one right in each division.
Right? We got one right.
And none right in our bets. You were 0 for 2. I was 0 for 3.
Don't focus on that.
So far I'm 0 for 7 on my bets.
I don't think the West is going to be great either. Go ahead.
Here comes the West.
Oh, this is painful.
This
is like having a performance review where you forgot to show up for work. And they were just like, you were terrible. You were the worst in the whole company.
This is the nightmare. We're having a test today, right? Yeah. 92.5. Houston Astros were supposed to win that division with 92.5. They got off to a terrible start. They ended up still winning the division, but now nowhere near 92.5. That whole division ended up underperforming in general, and they got 88 wins, 4.5 short of theirs. We picked the over and we bet the over because we thought they were going to be the best team in that division.
We were wrong.
Okay. Second was supposed to be the Rangers.
Defending champions, by the way.
Defending champions. They were the third most disappointing team in the American.
And I would argue probably the most. Not in terms of raw wins lost, but just going from champions.
They fell 10.5 games short of their 88.5 number with 78. We were interested. I think we picked the over with them because we expected them. Because basically we said these are going to be the three best teams in the AL. Yeah. The AL West seemed very stratified, and we thought we're going to take the over on the 3 and we're going to take the under on the 2, basically. And the Rangers went into that year knowing that they didn't have any starting pitching, that all their starting pitching was going to get healthy later. They were hoping by
mid-season, and it didn't really ever materialize. Betting on Tyler Mahle to get healthy proved to be not a great bet, shockingly.
That's right. And DeGrom and Scherzer, right? Yeah. So we missed that one. Seattle was right behind Texas, 87.5. We again we did what we do. We said we're going to take the over on them,
which was looking brilliant at the All-Star break, and then
they ended up winning 85 games, 2.5 games short.
I'm counting that as being correct.
Unfortunately, we both also bet on the Mariners. We missed that one, right? Then the Angels, we knew that they were going to be bad. We didn't realize they were going to be that bad. They were 71.5 was their number. Yeah. We kind of thought, that's pretty close, but we got that one right. We went under on those because we basically said that they're one of the two worst teams. Yeah. Right?
Hey,
and great. Then we had this number of the A's at 57.5, which is the lowest over-under we've ever seen in this.
I mean, they lost 115 games last year, 110 games 2 years ago.
That's right. And I think we both originally chose the under.
Right.
And then I think I switched it at the end just to have one different.
Yeah.
And they hit the over.
Look
they had
at you, the champion of S Mountain.
So none of us got any of our bets right. I went 0 for 10.
Yeah,
I went 0 for 10 on bets. You went 0 for 6 because you took the minimum.
John is destitute. He's living on couches.
Right. But I got 4 and 11 on the over unders, and you got 3 and 12.
My grandma used to say when I would do something dumb, and I would say that my friends were also doing the dumb thing.
Right.
She used to say they don't give awards for being the smartest guy in the dumb class. And that's you right now.
Right.
You're the smartest guy in the dumb class because your only classmate is me, and I'm way dumber.
Yeah.
Terrible, horrible. Next year.
Well, I'm giving up.
We're really going to focus.
I'm giving up on our stratified. Take the over on the.
I have 2 approaches in mind for next year. Actually, 3. One would be
flip a coin.
That's one of them. The smart approach would be really just put in the work. Contact people who cover all these other teams. Just break down the film. All 22 film, like football style. I'm not going to do that. One approach, you just mentioned, flipping coins.
Yeah, that's right.
The other approach, the George Costanza approach, just do the opposite of what you want to do.
Right. Well, that's
worked for him in one episode famously. He went up to a woman in a cafe and he said, "Hi, my name is George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents. Would you like to go out?" And she said, "Oh, yeah." So maybe if I think it should be the over, I'll take the under.
That's right.
That couldn't be worse.
You could wait until I make my pick and just go the opposite way. You would have gone 11-4 this year.
We should do that, because then somebody's a winner.
That's right. Well, that's probably true. When we do fantasy football, or when we did picks, etc., we always have a blind monkey. where we should add the blind monkey to this. We should just flip a coin.
Are you calling meat sauce that? Or is this? Oh, this is different. Sorry. Hi, Paul.
We just when we do the picks this spring, we'll take your pick, my pick, and we'll flip a coin. As the heads is over, tails is under.
I wasn't just making a monkey joke about meat sauce. I thought you were talking about the Power Trip has the football bet.
Well, they've got the ghost,
fantasy football,
which is similar.
That's
to
what
it.
I was.
That's right.
I'm all for mocking meat sauce, but not like that.
Our NCAA tournament always has a blind monkey. We're basically field of 64. Just we flip a coin, and there have been years where the blind monkeys finished in the top 5.
Some of my best performances in NCAA office pools, which I've done for 30 years or whatever, have been years like last year where I watched 0 college basketball, couldn't tell you a player on the majority of the teams, and just was like, okay, right. Here. And that's where you perform the best. So anyway, now, as a palate cleanser for how stupid we are, we're going to play for you like a 14, 15-minute segment of our recent show we did with Phil Miller of the Minnesota Star Tribune. We talked about a lot of stuff with him. It was a very fun episode. We love Phil, obviously. Yes. And we had to lure him onto the show with the promise of beer. So we are at a brewery for the first time, so that's what you'll hear.
You will hear background noise.
Background noise, which hopefully people used to like that as part of the podcast.
That's right.
This particular segment that I've picked is about the Pohlads and some of the insights Phil has, number one, for covering them for 20 years, but also doing some digging behind the scenes for the story that he wrote to kind of break the story for the Star Trib. Yeah. And enjoy this. Thank you, by the way, to our sponsors.
Let's
before you get to that,
up.
BetterHelp and Acorns.
Yep. And a special thank you to our presenting sponsor,
Blackstack. Excuse me. Bricksworth too.
Bricksworth too.
That's their sister.
That's right. They're our presenting sponsor, Blackstack Brewing, now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. Stop by your favorite liquor store or the Blackstack Tap Room to grab your favorite brew or try something new like that French Slopes Pilsner.
And now, listen to, other than John, the person who likes beer the most of anyone I've ever met in my entire life, Phil Miller.
The dynamics of the Pohlads ownership was never going to improve.
Yeah.
Really through no fault of Joe's, I think. But
I mean, I know that he took a lot of the shit here, and in part because he was the one giving the interviews or giving the non-answers and all that stuff.
He was put in the post of chief shit taker 2 years ago.
I'm not going to sit here and say he was anything less than unimpressive or anything more than unimpressive doing that, but also he's just getting kind of shoved out there to do it. Like, this is truly a family business, and it's not clear to me that he's even making these high-level decisions. He's certainly not making them on his own.
Yeah, are you talking particularly about his last day of the season talk?
I don't think, and maybe I just missed one, did he talk publicly to a media entity on the record between the DeRusha interview in spring training where he said right-sizing the payroll and the end-of-season thing we did?
I can't
that you're aware of.
I can't think of one.
Right.
No.
So that's what I thought.
I don't know. I think he assumed the topic of that would be Falvey and the front office and Rocco. Right.
They screwed up letting me in the room then.
Well, he said, "I'm not here to talk about payroll," and I think it surprised him because we talked to Falvey, who said Rocco's coming back,
right?
And I think that was set up for him to come in and say Falvey's coming back.
Which he did say that.
He did. I don't think he wanted or probably should have answered questions if that's all he wanted to say.
Right. That could have been a press release. In a way, then, based on that, if he was not expecting or wanting to answer payroll questions.
Well, and plus, he knew that this was coming. He knew that they're selling. So
okay, that's my next question.
So right. He definitely knew.
Right. No.
Yeah.
So how could he talk about next year's
But
payroll?
what is your sense of how long this has been in the works?
Yeah, because they just said the summer.
Yeah, I kind of buy that. I kind of think that I don't think they make this decision lightly. But I tell you,
the payroll cut.
I'm not saying lightly.
I
mean, was it longer than that? Quickly. Has it been? Was last year's $30 million payroll cut related to it? Like they're trying to clean up their expenses? Was the rebranding they did 2.5 years ago a prep for it?
I don't know. I will say, I've always thought. I thought when Target Field was built, I thought the Pohlads would sell within 2 or 3 years. That shot up the value of the franchise,
right.
and the old man was dead. Jim was a caretaker who certainly was not a public figure. And anyway, he did not sell after Target Field opened, which would have been seen as a real money grabbing.
Sure.
The PR on that would have been terrible. But I have thought for a decade, why are they still owning it? Because Bill was making movies. Bob is running a commercial real estate empire. They had
right. So that's the second generation.
Right.
Jim.
Carl's sons. Jim was the steward of the team, but had other business interests as well. Now we're to the third generation. There's 7 of them, and they come to the ballpark, but you rarely see the Pohlads at the ballpark. They certainly lie low. Joe was the only one. It wasn't like there was a competition for who's going to take over the team. Joe,
by default, he was chosen.
And Joe wanted to. Joe was in the press box in the Metrodome. We've known him. I've known him at some level for 15 years. But it's an asset that is now owned by 10 people, and if 2 or 3 of them want to keep it, and then came this year's the PR fiasco that they brought on themselves. Joe brought on themselves by cutting the payroll and being, God bless him, honest about it. But imagine being one of the other grandkids, and they're executives too, in a lot of different fields. Every time they meet anyone, they go like, "Oh, Pohlad, are you?"
I did think about that. How it's amazing that in your home state, where you are one of the richest, most powerful families in the entire state, with tentacles everywhere in terms of businesses, like you said. I mean, they own tons of things.
Yeah.
And they invest in tons of stuff. And the majority of people, when they hear the name Pohlad for the last certainly 25, 30 years, think cheap.
Yeah.
Those are the guys who are...
And they were going to contract the team.
Right.
They wanted to move the team.
Now, as you said, they brought that upon themselves.
Yeah.
But it is still sort of a remarkable way to be. And I do think it's easy for baseball fans like us or anybody listening to this to say, well, why wouldn't you be passionate if your family owned the team? But try to think of it not as a baseball team, which you are personally passionate about, but just think of it as if your grandfather just started a business that was successful.
Yeah, my uncle owns.
And 40 years later, they were like, "Oh, we have a car dealership. You want to run it?" And you're like, "Not really." And people who are into cars or want to run a business would say, "Well, that's such a great thing to be handed down. Why are you not interested in that?" But it's not their interest level for the third generation, and also just in general, the third generation of wealth is going to treat that wealth much differently than the generations that built or grew or maintained it, whatever.
Especially when half of that wealth is tied up in an asset that they can't cash out on until they sell. This is what
we talked about on the last show, which is everyone always...
And commercial real estate ain't that easy to cash out on right now either.
Right. But everyone always cites like, Forbes or whoever says the family's worth $4 billion or $3.8 billion or whatever. And I have no reason to doubt that. But just do the math on that. Like, a lot of that is tied up in the giant tower they built near Target Field.
But not the one. I got 2 emails after the sale complaining that, they build that tower in left field and then walk away.
Oh, they think...
and they don't own that tower.
Which I was shocked when they did build the one in left field, like I don't know what that's called, but like...
But that's not theirs. No, that's what I'm saying.
The one deep center field, the Four Seasons Tower.
The Four Seasons
I don't know what it's called. What is it called?
I think it's the RBC Tower.
Anyway, it's like 40-story, whatever.
Brousher.
Yeah. But I was shocked when they built the one in left field. Not they, but when someone built the one in left field, that they allowed that to be built. And I don't mean in the sense that they could block it, but in the sense that how do they not own that real estate?
Yeah.
They own all kinds of real estate in and around Target Field. How did they allow the most prime real estate that could affect the view from the home plate to not be theirs?
I asked Jim about that, about... Everyone assumes during construction. I said everyone assumes that's yours, and he said no. And I said that seems strange that you're not behind it. And he said, "Well, I know, but we say we're very pro downtown development. You kind of have to put your put your money where your mouth is." And he said, "Good for them to develop it." And I said, can you charge them for the view or anything?
Yeah. Cool.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of Wrigleyville-esque where you can just sit out there, and, which we saw down the stretch.
We saw construction workers out there.
That's true.
Right.
Do you ever sit on Austin Martin's patio and just watch the game
now
from
you've
there?
given away where Austin Martin lives, Phil.
Well, we can cut that out.
You want to say what floor it is?
I ran it in the paper.
Okay.
I tell you that Austin was... Yeah, I think it was Austin Martin told me that there's a golf simulator on the bottom floor, and he loves. I get the impression that they'll let him use it after hours after he comes into the game. And I said I've never heard of such a thing, and I mentioned that to my boss, and he said we have one here in the Tribune building.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that what you were doing just now over there?
Yeah, I should have.
I do remember saying to Austin Martin once, now that we've outed that he lived or lives, but I'll say lived. He could have moved out. We don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
In that building, I remember saying, that's amazing. Like, do you just wake up and walk over here? And he said, no, you can't walk straight from the building to here. You have to go all the way around.
That's right, because you've got to go through.
So I was like, it's not even worth living there anymore. But I didn't know about that golf simulator.
When it was going up, a Twins official told me they expect that probably half a dozen players every year will be living there. And I thought, really? You would want to live across the street from where you work? I don't know that I would.
I live, the same couch where I work, basically. But okay, so
I had the unfortunate job of being 4 blocks from my work when there was like a huge snowstorm.
Oh, and then you have to come
and then you're the one guy who has to come into the office
and run
the,
I can't come in when they can see your window from the office.
That's exactly
John,
right.
Can you unlock the front door for us?
No, I don't think Austin Martin's going to worry about the same problem.
That's true. Okay, so my takeaways here are you mostly agree with what we are saying, which is that sight unseen, the likelihood of the next owner or owners, I think we're all agreed that unless they have some exorbitant price tag, if it goes for what the kind of estimates are, which is like $1.5 billion somewhere, I do think they'll sell it because, like you said, it's a rarity to have this come on the market, and there are rich guys who are trying to buy this stuff.
And the longer they go, the worse that problem is going to get, especially if they're not winning. I remember Joe in the Champagne fest in the clubhouse last year talking about how this is exactly what we pictured and this is so great. And then at Media Day, I asked him, are you going to sell any interest in selling the team? The Orioles have just been sold
for 1.8 or something like that.
Yeah. And I asked him, will you still own the team 10 years from now? And he was like, yeah, I think so. I hope so. And so I suspect Joe is a minority voice. The statement saying that they're selling was in his name, but I bet it wasn't. His heart wasn't in it.
So, and I think you're kind of agreeing with what we said, which is that,
and that's important.
This wasn't going to change in any sort of meaningfully positive way with the poll ads. Because there isn't a 4th generation coming. The 3rd generation was going to be in charge, and if the 3rd generation, early in their tenure, coming off a playoff appearance and a success, was still in position to cut payroll, I think at the 40-year mark of poll ad ownership, we can kind of chalk that up to we know what this ownership group is capable of or is interested in or is willing to do. Yeah. And so then, if it's even a coin flip, if you're kind of walking through the door number 2, not knowing what's behind the door, I'm just willing, if I'm a Twins fan, and I am, to just take my chances because the likelihood that it's worse seems much smaller. Like, if it's tangibly worse, seems much smaller than the likelihood that it's roughly the same or better. And I think roughly the same is, like you were saying, probably if they're going to run it like a quote-unquote business.
Yeah.
But even within that, it's not clear to me that they were good at running it as a business.
Well,
like, actually, I would argue the opposite of that, especially over the last couple of years with the TV situation and the PR mess-ups that they've had and all that.
Failing to take advantage of last season. But I will say, I have heard... I'm not going to claim to know much about the internal family dynamics. I don't... But I have heard that it's an unusual situation in that the whole family owns together a chunk of their grandfather's or father's fortune. And that's a lot of different businesses that are all more or less to some degree tied in family-wise.
Right.
Joe owns,
under the same umbrella, kind of.
Yeah, I don't know to what extent Bill's movies that he produced are owned by his nieces and nephews, but I've heard that each member of the family has kind of gone their own way and have their own thing. I mean, some of them are in the same businesses and all that, but you don't want to be the one who's losing money. You don't want to be the one.
And by the way, you don't want to be the one who is getting written up in the newspaper for giving bad quotes and how everyone hates the name of your family, basically.
Again, how uncomfortable are you when you meet people and they go, "Oh, I hate your cousin." So
also you just get, the bigger the family gets, to have that much of your equity tied into one asset that you can't make liquid.
Right.
I mean, it almost doesn't matter what other pressures are on, and I think there are other pressures that are put on them. I'm not even saying external pressures. I'm saying internal pressures in terms of running a business and liquid cash and all that sort of thing.
Right. Stuff we'll never know.
Right.
But, yes.
but just in terms of, at some point, listen, it's nice that the Twins continue to appreciate and become, but when one of your assets appreciates more than the rest of your assets,
to get that appreciation.
At some point, it takes up such a big part of your portfolio that you look at it as a risk.
True, although you can borrow money off that.
But also, I would say, it also becomes a matter of we've got more and more people here that want some money. Right?
Yeah. Right? I was struck by the NFL this year.
Gleeman